Привет, маленькие разработчики. Да куда вам уж, маленькие просмотрщики видео и ждущие какой-нибудь новенький трейлер. Так вот, сегодня оповествовали разработчики такой маленькой игрушки. Там как она вообще действует, что там будет, какой движок в ней встроен. И все это в видяхе, знаете, какой игра-то называется так по-детски Assassin's Cred 3, которую мы очень все ждем. И дождаться-то и не можем. Ну, смотрим наконец-таки, и потом, после видео я вам еще кое-что добавлю.
One of our goals with Assassin's Creed 3 was to sort of rebuild the franchise from its core. Even though Assassin's Creed is published every year, it's not developed year by year.
Assassin's Creed 3 started in January 2010, where basically a bunch of people coming out of AC2, like AC2 just shipped in November, so they decided to try to explore different ideas, different period as well.
Right when we started, we knew this game had to be a fresh new entry in the franchise and be ambitious and kind of reinvent everything.
We knew this had to be the same kind of jump from, AC1 to AC2. For AC2 to AC3. We know the core of Assassin's Creed. It's the combat, the free-running, social stealth. By keeping an eye on those three things, those three pillars of our gameplay, we could bring the gameplay down to a very sort of basic level and then build it back up again with a lot of new stuff, a lot of new ingredients for the player, different ways of playing.
The way we organized the ramp up of AC3 is to have most of the core team from AC2 to jump in AC3. And at that time, it was just the start of AC Brotherhood.
And at that stage, there was about 11 or 12 of us, and for the first sort of 6 months, it was probably under 30 people. And we were just talking basically about where it should be set, what time period would work, who our heroes should be. The first two things we decided that we thought would work, one was the idea of the American Revolution, and the second was the idea of a Native American hero. So what we tried to do was build it almost like a pyramid, an inverse pyramid, where you start with these big core decisions, and really you have to stick with them and then work it out from there.
The American Revolution, a lot of the ideas and themes behind it dovetail really nicely with the themes behind the Templar-Assassin conflict. We've had this, millennia-old struggle of free will, versus oppression. The idea that the Templars want to impose their version of the world upon people and sort of control them in that manner. And I think you can draw a parallel in that a lot of patriots may have felt that this is what the loyalists were trying to do, that they wanted to take the British system and impose it upon these colonies in the Americas. And a lot of people started to resist that idea, this idea of like people that are far away who think they know better are trying to tell me what to do and how to live my life.
I like the fact that when we announced the setting that it was going to be the American Revolution, that people were surprised and were asking how could this work, how would it function, because that meant we had somewhere fresh. And that was really our first goal, was to make sure that it was an unexpected place to set a game, that it was somewhere a game hadn't been set before, and somewhere where we could hopefully do some new stuff. When you have a very small team, before you have a lot of engineers or you have a lot of content creators, you still want to draw a picture for people, something better than a document. So we build a video, a little movie, it's a couple of minutes long, and it tries to be as real as possible. No assets that you couldn't use in the real game. The camera's in the same position that we want the camera to be in the final game. Any weapons you use are ideas we have for gameplay, as systemic and believable as possible.
The target gameplay footage is really critical for just setting, this is what we're aiming for. It gives us basically a living, visible prototype. These are the people I'm going to see, the kinds of enemies I'll meet, the experience that I want to have for the player. We take that video and we can basically just break that down into a series of different features, right? The things that I'm going to need to be able to give to the coders and the animators and the world team the sound guys and say, okay, to execute this, here's the list of things, the features that I need to be able to create this game.
Like any project, we start with ideas, and then first thing we want to do is prototype key ideas or the most risky ideas.
We need to have risk to be lowered right from the start. Like the tree navigation, like we need to know early on that it works. The naval battle, we need to know early on that it works.
On the engine side and on the gameplay side, we have very little at this point. We'll have essentially these test environments where you have, for us it's just like an orange ground texture that has a black grid on it that tells you how far apart things are. And then inside of that, we'll test absolutely everything and do quick prototypes to try out some ideas, see what works, see what doesn't work, decide whether a feature is good enough to use and good enough to build and is going to be fun before we commit to the full-on development of it. So with that came a lot of new engine technologies, and to the extent that we consider it essentially a completely new engine.
We decided to build a new engine for Assassin's Creed 3 based purely on gameplay. So obviously the hardware hasn't changed. We didn't suddenly find 80 mega RAM that was hidden away in the 360 or the PS3, but we're able to say, if we were going to build an engine that enabled us to create new content, what would happen?
So Anvil Next is the next major iteration of the Assassin's Creed engine. The Frontier is the #1 motivation to do Anvil Next in the beginning. So the first thing we tried was, can we make a forest that looks good but still works with a decent frame rate and is still readable from a gameplay point of view. We also prototyped stuff like the Deep Snow came with deformable tracks. In previous games we had water, but it was always like a straight delimitation between water and ground. Now it's progressive beaches, so what do we do with fighting in that thing with knee-deep snow, knee-deep water, animals mixed with that? So it all came from the first prototypes. So another big challenge that came pretty quickly was the number of NPCs on screen, both for battlefields and from cities like New York. We thought we can cheat and block people's line of sight so they don't see as far. But in the end, because of the battlefields, we also had another reason to develop a new tech that now enables us to render over 2,000 NPCs at once. And we use the same tech to solve both problems. We didn't find all the answers back then, but we found a lot of questions that we had to answer. It took maybe a year and a half to finally say, yeah, I think we have a recipe, we have a good idea, we think we're gonna make it.
Coming up with how Connor looked, I think, was one of the hardest things we had to do in the game.
Connor is our main hero. He's half Native American, half British. He was raised by the Mohawk tribes.
He's a lot stronger than the previous assassins. This assassin like bludgeons and he beats up and he breaks arms and legs. You'll see the pain on the enemy's faces when he's taking them out.
We wanted a character who was noble, who was out to fight against injustice wherever he saw it.
Ну вот и все, конец. Как и предлагал я вам добавить, хочу, чтобы вы подписались на мой канал. В уголку вон там можно нажать и подписаться. Еще можно сделать лайки, комментарии и подписывайтесь, ведь обзоры-то у меня не кончаются. Они все, трейлеры-то выходят, а я все вкладываю, а вы смотрите. До свидания. Спасибо всем. Пока и удачи.